So this is ResumeMaster, our program to simplify resumes into one document that lets the user just export which items they need for their resume. My name is Ashley.
I'm Micah.
I'm Jacob.
I'm Brooklyn.
I'm Matthew.
Here is a demo of our program. So when you load up the program, it will have you select a file, and then it will show you your resume with the categories that we have set it. On this demo, we're going to show adding an extra experience. And we type in the fields. And then in an experience, you can have the organization, all of that, and then you have bullets at the bottom of it. And the other thing that you can do is you can add more categories to it. And this is adding another career profile with some different text. And then you can make different things visible or not to make sure they show up on the resume, and anything that's not visible obviously won't show up on the exported. And when you export the PDF, it opens it up and you get your resume.
Alright, now we're going to take a brief moment to talk about the design class diagram. So, it's going to look very overwhelming, but I'm just going to give a brief overview real quick. There's three main categories of classes that we have. On the top here is everything related to importing a resume from a file and exporting it back to either a data file, how we store the resume on the file system, or into a PDF version. So anything that wants to export a resume is going to be using the resume exporter class. There's many different ways you can interface with this. The most basic is you give it a file path and tell it what template to use. Currently there's only one template, but there will be a few more in the future. The template actually has a bunch of subsidiary files packaged with the program, so that it's very easy to change each individual piece of the template and add new templates, make it very extendable, with a few helper classes in between to access all the various bits of information. Down in the middle here we have everything related to storing the resume internally in memory. So we have an overarching resume class, and it all acts kind of like a tree structure. So in a resume we have several categories, or colloquially called sections. We have in different types of categories have their own classes because they all behave slightly differently. So in experience categories we have experiences, so that's things like education and work experience. In bullet categories, so just bullet points, we have bullets. And a few different interfaces all have bullets, so we can abstract those methods to one common interface. Down at the bottom here, we have everything related to editing this internal representation of a resume. So each category gets its own slightly different edit pane, as we saw in our demonstration. And even the experiences and the bullet lists all have their own edit panes that are all reused whenever possible. So that's a brief overview. You can see there's a lot of things going on, but program flow goes pretty much up or down depending on what your goal is. So now we're going to give a brief overview of some of our sequence and communication diagrams. So this first one here is part of the resume exporter that we talked about earlier. It's relating to getting the LaTeX version of your resume, so constructing that LaTeX version. That's how we're going to be actually converting it into a PDF. So the first things we're going to be doing are getting the string representation of part of the template. So that's going to be different per template file, but it's all generalized, so we'll be getting the separator of the current template. And we go through each category using some Java stream operators. and get the LaTeX version of each category. So in fact, each individual component of a resume is generating their own LaTeX string that is all combined and collapsed into a giant document. So in this case, we have a for each here. This is going to be acting on each category, and in each category we're going to get the LaTeX string of itself, and depending on the category, it will also may call some other get LaTeX strings on different subsidiary components, for example, bullet points or experiences. Once we come back, we get the wrapper template, and we convert everything into a string. And once we have that string, we're going to return it from the function, and this return value is eventually going to be used to write to the file in a later function.
So this is the diagram for saving a header category from the edit pane. So when you click the save button, this is what happens. It first gets the object for set link, set email, and phone number. And then it will set those values for the actual resume. And then it will get the text for the address and set that one.
Finally, we come to handling looking up a bullet or subpoint from an experience category by its ID. This is one of those stream functions, pretty simple one as it goes. It starts by getting the stream and then filters it down to just one, well, hopefully one element, which is ID matches the one which was provided by the caller. These final few calls of find first and or else null is just handling the potential of being requested for an ID which does not exist. So that just takes the list, it gets whatever was first in it, which may be nothing, and then or else null is specifically guarded by the class to return null if there wasn't anything to get. So ultimately, it does exactly what the name says.
So this is our package diagram. As you can see, we split up our packages to contain related business logic and also GUI components, such as like the editor and the editor panes that are inside of the editor. You can also kind of notice that the resume components is used by a lot of different packages. It's very much the core of our application, and it is what contains most of the business logic. You can also see that there are other packages that contain utility, such as export, util, and the file packages. And the file package also has an external dependency on a library called JSON, which relates to exporting and importing JSON to the file system. And we also have two other packages down you can see at the bottom, the admin view and user, which currently aren't very fleshed out or integrated yet, but they will be later on.
So finally, we come to a section where we give an example of our justifying designing the program the way that we did. Our first example is for the export resume data file system operation back from iteration 1. This operation overall spans 3 classes: the menu controller, editor menu bar, and resume file manager. Of these, the editor menu bar receives the UI inputs from the user, fulfilling the graph controller pattern, which it then indirects these inputs over to the menu controller to decouple the editor menu bar from the resume file manager. From here, we come to a case of high cohesion within the resume file manager because it is only concerned with the exporting. It does not deal with the details of the export. It delegates this off to other classes like JSON or to the file writer object. And finally, this object also has very low coupling, being only connected to the file writer and the JSON object, nothing else. The next example of our justifications is for the toggle category operation. This is concerned only with the editor category header class. And our reasoning for this is, one, information expert. This class knows about the category which is being displayed, and more specifically, knows about the visibility attribute within the category. So it already has the information required to fulfill this. It also stores the user desired visibility within it, because it handles that UI section of the toggle as well, meaning that it already has everything it needs to fulfill the responsibility. And finally, there is low coupling, because this design is already coupled to the visibility. Therefore, putting this operation within the class does not increase the coupling of the system.
Next we have our test coverage plan. So we kind of had a weird case of having to cover the UI aspects as well as the internal functionality of our program. So I'm going to start with the bullet category edit pane, which is just one of our many edit panes. So constructing this edit pane, of course, is going to come with making sure that you can add or remove bullets safely. And this is just testing whether or not it correctly did this against something that, should look like how it does. Then there comes saving. So, if you change something, actually verifying that it has saved and then verifying if it is modified. So, change something, it should say, yes, it was modified, and don't change something, it should say it was not modified. Now we move on to resume exporter. So we have a resume and we're going to send it to a PDF. So testing it with a filled in resume versus a not filled in resume and seeing what happens. Also testing to export to a file that has already existed, making sure that it correctly overwrites that file. And another huge part of this is that we take advantage of LaTeX. So making sure that we're actually getting the correct LaTeX string so that it renders the correct PDF. So, we have the correct LaTeX string, and we call a LaTeX generator and make sure that it actually gives us what it should give us. Now next we have miscutils, which I would say a huge part of this was having issues with escape characters in our resume, and having that work with the files and with our program. So we have to incorporate, an ampersand or a backslash and a question mark. We have to make sure that those characters work. So testing our resume with and without those characters to make sure that nothing goes wrong during the execution of our program, that the user can actually type in whatever they want to. I'm going to skip a little bit just for time's sake and talk about our file manager. So we use JSON. You use JSON for the data file of the resume, so making sure that things get exported correctly and imported correctly whenever we make changes to the file. So also making sure that if you don't make any changes and you export and import, everything is exactly the same as it should be. Those kinds of things are very important with this kind of system. And also, some of the simplest tests you'll ever have to do are getters and setters. So if you set a value, you should get the same value back when you get it. And that's kind of how we've done our test coverage plan.
This is our Gantt diagram. As you can see, everything up until iteration 2 has been completed, which contained implementation and diagrams and some planning. We also have created a temporary schedule for iteration 3, which is subject to change and likely will change, but we will try to follow this as best as we can.
This is the link to our Git repository, which is connected with our issue tracking and our commit history. So if you really want to see that commit with 5 merges to master, you can.
And finally, our times cards reports. You can see that we've all spent tons of time on this project and clearly all deserve equal role in making this turn out as it has. I hope you've enjoyed our presentation.